great for 83.
Yeah.
So.
You know, that's the other thing. People always say you look great. I want to say I do. Are you kidding? I just looked in the mirror. Jesus.
Well, I think that's
God, if that's good, what's bad? Anyway.
Well, I feel the way I feel is, aging is kind of like you're a lobster slowly being boiled to death, and
Well, that's true.
instead of not noticing the temperature change, I feel like I'm hypersensitive to the temperature change. So I know that my hairline is receding, and I know all the very minute details of how I'm gradually getting older. But to people
How old
in front
are
of
you?
me, they don't know. I'm 40.
Yeah, you look younger.
Yeah.
But I know, I'll tell you another thing about turning 80. Everybody you meet says, "You're looking very good." And I went, that's another way of saying, I'm really not looking at all very good, but you want to compliment me. Nobody else used to say that ever. There must be something wrong. What's wrong? What am I? Anyway.
Not at all. I think you really do.
Well, good. Actually, I like to hear it for what it's worth. But I know what it's worth.
But I think I'd rather hear that than somebody say,
yeah.
your hair is so thin.
Are you all right? You know that thing. Yeah, I'm all right. What do you mean, am I all right? Of course I'm all right. You look so pale. You look so... Or you look too red. God. You're flushed. No, I'm not flushed. I'm just hot. Or I'm embarrassed. Or what? I don't know. What?
So I guess I'm ready to go. Whoa.
You had the voice test and that's all done?
Yep.
Okay.
It's all ready to go. And the light is okay.
I'm going to open this so I don't have to open it embarrassingly well. This is stuff that I can refer to if I forget names, for instance. Blandiana.
And what I'll do is if their names, and what I found in the interviews is that talking and going through some of the events jogs the memories of people I'm interviewing. And when I was interviewing Tom Fleming, he came upon this great story about when Heinrich, I'm going to mispronounce him, Boll went to the Soviet Union and had a terrible trip. And he came back and he wrote to Tom Fleming this long letter that was very heartfelt about all the conditions, everything that happened on the trip. And Tom ended up turning it into an article that he wrote. And he said that he would look for the letter. And that's one of those things. I went to the archive, and I think I found the letter today.
Oh, good.
So I'll probably write back to Tom, and I'll tell him what was in the letter, and we'll probably do a follow-up where I'll ask him some questions about it, and if we can jog his memory some more, we'll follow up on that. But I think I would think of these as not necessarily introductory interviews, but
preliminary. That's all right.
But yeah, and we'll follow up, and we'll be down at the archives, and if we, throughout the year, if we want to do a follow-up.
I'm here.
You're here, and if you're willing to do it, that'd be great. And we can also email and talk on the phone and maybe flesh out some of the things to make sure that
Well, that makes it much easier. Yeah. Then
so
this is not
pressure to
exactly have it all absolute. And okay, that's fine. That'll help. And I may stop every now and then and say, well, I don't remember exactly the name, but it is that or that, and then we can fill in about that later.
Right.
And that'll come from the archive too.
Right. And the other thing is that the video is. The video and the audio are really references. I really plan on using the transcript more than anything else. I feel like when we can edit down the conversations or what people are saying and present it in a written format,
it's better.
We can really get at the heart of
the
matter.
And we're all writers. We'd rather do that.
And I'd rather be able to shape it that way than to have it be a video clip that we have to force into a certain format that might not be what we want it to be. Okay,
terrific. Now, when you say video audio, they're simultaneous and they're the same thing, right?
Yes. Well, I have an audio recorder as a backup.
I see.
I always want to have a voice.
The video records as well, speech and all of that, plus visual.
Right.
That records just the voice and have it back. Okay.
Right. So, is there a place that you wanted to start?
Well, why don't I start with what you suggested a little while ago, that you, I guess on the basis of what you've already seen of the archive, see that there was here and there transitional periods. And I must say that that's what I feel happened during my 2 years as president. I was a transitional figure, and I was working hard on certain things that had been initiated, in one case at least, earlier, and on several that were going to be further developed later, but that started under my under my presence, if nothing else. Larry McMurtry was a very good president, and I think a very strong one. I learned a lot from him just by watching how he operated. One thing he taught me was to trust. He said, you've got to trust your executive committee, or I'm not even sure what it's called now, maybe it's called the trustees. In those days, it was a huge thing, 90 members at one point. It's certainly over 80 while I was there. That's an incredible group of active and volatile writers to cope with, and he did it so well that I learned from him really how to cope with a group that large. I had been head of another association, the Modern Greek Studies Association, for some years, so I had some experience, but that was a very exciting and not so easy experience because of the numbers. And one of the things that we started to work on during that period was reducing the size of what I guess is now called the Board of Trustees, bringing it down to something that was more manageable and that had more solid devotion, instead of people coming to see what action was going and what to do and so on and so forth. I don't think it changed much the dynamics of how people presented themselves there, because writers don't change that way, but it certainly gradually became a smaller group and a more manageable group, and that started, at least as a thought and idea, during my term, particularly with the help of Karen Kelly. Karen Kelly is the one that you really have to talk to, because Karen was there for many years and was very much involved in these transitional periods, particularly because she's the one who carried the past and knew how to pass on into the future more than any individual president did. Even though I was on the board for many years, I didn't have the same role, and I wasn't always on the executive committee and so on and so forth, but she always was there. So she's the person you want to check with about some of this that's going on. Anyway, right after Larry McMurray, this idea of reducing and restructuring, in a way, the PEN organization as it was then defined began and continued, and I think was resolved much to the good of the association some years later. I'm not sure exactly when the reduction occurred, but the movement began early. That was one thing. Another thing was the creation of a PEN Foundation, an idea that started under Larry McMurtry, got to a certain distance, and then pretty well collapsed. And Karen Kennedy will be able to give you the details about that, because she knows what brought on the collapse, when, and how. But I was there at the time when it was still operating in some form. It wasn't operating well. I think one of the problems was that we had to resolve the problem of having a foundation, members of that foundation, who were not members of PEN. They were friends of PEN. But to be a member of PEN, you had to be a writer, or you had to be an editor, you had to be something else. And resolving that was part of a problem. I remember Dick Snyder, who was then head editor, I guess, at Simon & Schuster, said, I don't see how you can expect us to participate in this organization without having a vote, or some way of... and he had a point, even though he was a difficult man. I'm not afraid to say that. Yes, I am. You can rub that out at some other point. Anyway, he was head of the company that I was publishing a book with at some time. I'm not sure he even knew that, and I don't think it mattered a damn to him, but he was one of the central figures that we hoped would help us create this foundation, and he brought up this problem of exactly what authority this foundation would have, and if they weren't members and didn't take part in it, what was the point? Well, that was resolved, and I think, as I say, Karen Kelly will be able to explain exactly how it was resolved. But that was one of the important things that we wanted to begin to create, to find ways of getting writers to make a larger contribution to the organization, because they were not generous. They should have been more generous, and we decided we needed outside help. And originally it was vastly helped by Norman Mailer after the Congress that you've probably already heard described and so on and so forth. I won't go into that detail, but that's what started a larger budget and an ambition to have a larger budget. Then the question was how to manage that with donations, and not only from writers but from outside and so on and so forth. So that was the second transitional operation that was going on during my presidency that didn't get to full completion. And the third, and the one that really ended up interesting me most of all, partly because I entered Penn for two reasons. I entered to support translation when translation needed the support it wasn't getting. And I was very active in that sense. That's why I joined the organization way back, although I also joined as a novelist. I mean, I was wearing two hats, and I kept wearing both those hats, but translation was something that interested me very much. But another thing that interested me was the rights that were violated in so many places, even in America to some degree, but also abroad, that ended up in the Writers in Prison program of International Penn, and that was supported very strongly by our Freedom to Write program in our organization, internationally under Michael Scammell originally, and then under various people leading it in the American Penn. And that was one thing that interested me a lot and got me involved fundamentally and with full energy in International Penn. Something that I think the American Penn now in its discussions of itself doesn't give proper attention to. The role of the American Penn in International Penn was vital at certain points. And it certainly was one of the things during the transitional period of my presidency that I devoted a great deal of time to and that I followed up on. I ended up going to 11 of the international congresses as representing Penn. First, I think just before I became president, but also during my presidency, but long time beyond, because the functioning of that and the Writers in Prison aspect of that in particular, but also the creation of new Penn centers and of the cooperation between international groups was something that I was always interested in, having spent a lot of my time abroad and being a translator, at least in part and vitally. So that part of the International Penn situation, and what it was then was rather complicated, became one of the most exciting parts of what I got involved in. And I will be happy to tell you about that in detail, but you ought to have a chance to ask some more questions.
Well, there were a couple of threads that I had noted. And I think a couple of them I think we can talk about later, but I wanted to just kind of go toward the translation right off the bat, because it seems like that's one of the things that just looking through your work, you're obviously very involved in translation for your entire career. And being at Penn, I've been at Penn since 2004. I was new to translation when I came to Penn. I was just out of graduate school, and I hadn't really put much thought into where translated works came from. I've been deeply steeped in translation in my time at Penn, and I was always under the impression that the current round of translation committee and the translation fund that was started by an anonymous donor, I think 2004, we'd kind of invented the wheel in helping facilitate translations of international literature, in the early 2000s. When in going through the archives and looking through
much earlier,
it's been going on for ages. It's been going on. It's been a big part of Penn's mission from the very beginning. And so one of the things that I'm very interested in looking at is kind of following the thread of how translation has been important to members' lives and the organization as a whole. And what was going on in translation. I think the Congress in 1986 brought a lot of international writers to New York I think it was the largest congregation of writers of international writers in New York, and it seems like an egg had been cracked open at that time. It seems like there was more attention paid to that. And I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts about the early work in translation that Penn did.
Well, they gave a prize for one thing early on, and that was important. And I'm not sure exactly what the dates of that creating were, but the committee itself was very active in pursuing publishers who weren't giving proper credit to translators, and that was so from the start. They were also vital in creating a model contract,
Right.
and in helping translators begin to think of themselves as serious writers and going for contracts as any writer ought to. And they were persistent in those two areas all along, and that's what I supported thoroughly and worked on hard. Also, on the international side, we had a international translation committee that had its own efforts to create a kind of common authority for translators, and that was a little harder to manage and to engage with, but we were also involved in that. But it was really what was happening on the domestic scene that interested me, because I was directly involved in terms of the contracts that I was drawing up and so on and so forth.
And your contracts live on. The model contract we still have on the website, and we have I think it's the most extensive translation directory where you can find...
Absolutely, and it's been changed, it's going on, it's been improved over the years, it's been altered, and that's wonderful. But Penn was one of the only places in the world early on that gave translation full authority as writers. And at one point, the National Book Awards also offered a translation prize. They stopped doing that at some point. Now they don't do it. But Penn goes on faithfully with its several awards, and thank goodness, because that means that there is some recognition for translators at the highest level, and I'm all for that, and I will continue to support that. But the international side, well, let me give you an example of what I mean by the excitement of it, the drama of it. I was just talking to Eric Lax. I don't know if you know him, but he was a leading member of USA West. It's now called USA. Penn West. I think it's now just Penn USA.
Right.
And back then it had a slightly different name. It's gone through certain stages, but he came to join the international effort, and he's now still with it. I must say, to my surprise, I learned he's now secretary of, or is it treasurer? He's treasurer of the international organization, not secretary. He's treasurer. Secretary is what we all fought to improve at certain times in our continuing membership there. But he had reminded me of something that was, to me, an example of the kind of thing that American Penn was able to organize and help with. We had a Congress in Guadalajara, and at that Congress, the then Secretary of International Penn, Alexander Bloch, who had gotten on the nerves of a number of us for being, we thought, too autocratic and too ready to make decisions without consulting the proper centers, and so on and so forth. There were certain grievances. He was also very effective in organizing congresses and did a good job on the whole. I'm not going to knock him totally, but he wasn't a Democrat in any modern sense. And it came to a head in Guadalajara. What happened was that the president then of International Penn, Ronald Harwood, known as Ronnie to us, and I'll refer to him as Ronnie all along, a very good playwright and an important playwright in England, and a very outspoken supporter of writers' rights, internationally and otherwise. I mean, he had a real history of helping with that. A tough guy, nevertheless. He's now, I think, Sir Ronald Harwood. I think he progressed to the point of being knighted for his work. God bless him. He had been the head of International Penn that's president, for 2 years. And then I think the normal term was 3 years. Well, he wanted to pull out on the third year because he felt he wanted to get back to his work, and it was taking too much time, and he got too involved in it, and he was very active when he was president. But the assumption had been promoted that he was going to take a third year, and we all relied on that. When nominations came up, we didn't look at them, we didn't do much about them, and we assumed that Ronnie Harwood, when we got to Guadalajara, was going to accept his third year, and that was going to be the end of it. Well, we got to Guadalajara, and he refused. He said, no, I don't want to go on for a third year. And Alexander Bloch said, well, we have the ideal candidate who just happens to be coming from her kind of exile all these years, and her name was Anna Blondiana. That's Blandiana, a poet, and a poet of some reputation, coming from, I can't remember, I think it was Poland, anyway, one of the eastern countries. And she was delayed in arriving in Guadalajara. She was coming as a representative of her, whatever organization she represented, and didn't quite get there. But Alexander Bloch got up and said, okay, we have decided that, and we weren't sure who the we was. I guess it was Ronnie Harwood and maybe anybody else he wanted, to nominate her for president of PEN, and we hope there will be no opposition. Well, there was immediate opposition, and particularly from the American Center. That included me and Karen, and I'm not sure who else was, I'm not sure anybody else was representing us in Guadalajara, but it was also supported by Eric Lax from USA West, and it was also supported by Niels Bohr from Denmark, and by the Scandinavians, Monica Nagler, who was a very active and very liberal member of the organization, and the Scandinavians generally were with the Americans on supporting the liberal side of International PEN rather than the autocratic side. And we all objected, and we met before the nominations were brought to the floor, before we had even a meeting of the Congress, and said, we've got to fight this, we can't allow this, this is not right, we can't have somebody imposed on us just at the last minute without having gone through the normal nomination procedure. Maybe Anna Mandian is a wonderful writer and all of that, but who is she? We don't know anything about her, she isn't even here. So we went out to dinner after a meeting in a side room, maybe several that we had, to organize our opposition. And we went out to dinner under the tutelage of Takashi Moriyama, who is the Japanese representative. You'll run into his name there too. And who I think had some maybe commercial representation having to do with Picasso. But anyway, he took us to a restaurant called the Picasso Restaurant in Guadalajara, which sold some items there. I bought a plate, Picasso plate, which I have in the living room, and there were other things there, and among other things were ties with several ties designed by Picasso. Beautiful, crazy ties. We decided everybody at this dinner should buy a tie, and we should wear it the next day. And we had something like 15 to 20 people show up at the General Assembly wearing these ties. It freaked out the people who were pushing Anna Mandian. And although a vote was, it wasn't really, it was pretty crude, but we decided that the only thing we could do is suggest that Alexander Bloch maybe was violating the Constitution by being too old for his job. At 65, you were supposed to get out, and nobody else, nobody beyond 65. He was totally offended that his age was what was brought up, and a vote was taken, and he won. But of course, he didn't win. It was a vote of something like 60 to 40. that said, okay, he can go on being international secretary even though he's over 65, but it did not sit well. And finally, Ronnie Harwood, realizing that this was not the right way for things to go, decided he would take a third year. But the Picasso Club, as we called ourselves, remained. And from then on, we wore our Picasso ties anytime that we thought there was need for revolt on the international stage. We didn't go on doing it very long, but we all still have the ties. And they're there as a sort of, and it was the American Center that really propelled this insistence on some sort of democracy. Well, following that, for years after that, there were many moves made to democratize the International PEN and to give it a different kind of structure, and that went on. That was a continuing effort, and it went on under other presidents of International PEN, as well as the next guy came up was Homero Arigis, who turned out to be a Greek. So I got along, I became very good friends with him, and we're still friends. He ran the organization for the next, I think, 6 years. And during his tenure, there was a democratization of International PEN. Michael Roberts, who took over after Karen Kennelly, also being a lawyer and with a lot of experience in international negotiation, eventually did a very good job promoting the restructuring of International PEN, and now I think it's a much healthier and better organization. Joanne Ackerman, another member of our group, was very much involved in that and eventually became president of it, which I thought was wonderful because she was she devoted her time to that too. So that was, to me, the most exciting part of my presidency, and of the years after that, because I went on going to international congresses. I remained a member of the board for a long time until they decided that they better get rid of these old presidents, and they needed room for younger people, and they were right about that. But that was my main commitment.
Right. Well, it seems like maybe after the '86 Congress, I know there were two Congresses, well, three, but the two that seemed to be have some sort of importance were the '66 Congress and the '86 Congress. And it seems like at the '86 Congress, American Pen seemed to step into a leadership role.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of it's maintained and continues to maintain. I think the
That's correct.
American Pen Center is the most active. It's the largest. It has,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's one of the only pen centers that has a professional staff that really carries out work, and it does have a leadership role, and it influences what other pen centers does, and particularly what International Pen does. Was that still in the works when you were president, or was it one of those things that was it a gradual?
Let me remind me what the it is.
I guess the influence of Pen American Center on international.
Well, oh yeah, it certainly started before I got there, but that's my whole point, was that it became crucial, absolutely crucial. And the example of what I'm saying is, it was the reform of it was primarily promoted by, well, and supported by the Scandinavians. As I said, there were other centers that were equally ardent about helping, although there was a bit of more of a conflict sometimes among those centers too. But we were consistently and actively and sometimes with great aggression promoting our international interests in making International Pen more like American Pen, I guess, and more like a society that was not promoting individual writers for their own sakes, but for the benefit of all writers, and for writers in trouble. I mean, it was the writers in prison was a vital part of International Pen as far as I was concerned, and always remained that. That was crucial, and they did crucial work. And they go on doing that. That's the heart of it, as far as I'm concerned. That and promotion of translation, promotion of new centers, of creating organizations for writers where they don't exist, and there are all those aspects too. But writers in prison, to me, is really still the heart of it. That may be personal.
No, I think that's one of the main things that just about everyone holds in common is their passion for defense of free expression, writers in prison, and also just censorship. The idea that it's not so much that people should have the right to write and express themselves, but also that by denying them the ability to put that out there, you're denying everyone else the ability to read or to know about what they're writing about.
Exactly. That's I haven't mentioned censorship, but you're right. That's a crucial part of it, all over. And I must say, Larry Seams has done a wonderful job too. He's to me the heart of what's been happening. One of the central parts of what's been happening in American Pen for the last 5 or 6 years since he came to the West. But even when he was on the West Coast, he was still working in that direction too, and doing very good work. So it continues to be, to me, a vital issue. I want to say one other little episode that was a personal thing that happened during my presidency. Being a Philhellene, not to say an ardent Greek, I'm not Greek at all, I'm Irish and German, but I've spent so much time with Greece and working on Greek things. I decided one thing I wanted to do was get to Turkey, which had such an abysmal record, particularly of creating journalists and others, and of trying they thought, shape some sort of democracy out of what they were, which was not democratic at all. So I went to visit the ambassador to Turkey in Washington, representing Penn, and he was very receptive. He wanted to talk to me, no problem about that. And when I went in to visit him, there was another gentleman sitting there, and mysterious looking, younger than the ambassador, and I wondered what he was. He said, "This is my security advisor sitting here." And I said, "Uh-oh, now I know where we are." And I said, "Would you think we can have an honest conversation with your security advisor sitting by?" He said, "Oh, don't worry. There's no difference between us. We share what I know, he knows, what he knows, I know." And I said, "Well, what about this business of your efforts to progress towards democratic society in Turkey, when you mistreat writers and put them all the time in prison for things?" And he said, "Oh, no." He says, "No. We're working very hard to move towards democracy." And my feeling has always been that anything that is going to be substantial and is going to be solid has to come slowly, so that it has the solid ground under it. Like a tree that he started using metaphor after metaphor about how wonderful democracy was progressing in Turkey. Well, this was in 91 or 92. And I won't go on this theme, but where are we now? It's 20 years later. And we're still moving slowly towards democracy there, and rather still too slowly as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, that was my one trip. And of course the gentleman next to him was their CIA representative, I'm pretty sure. And I shook his hand heartily and said, good luck with democracy. Yes, yes, good luck. Good luck to you too. Anyway, that was my one formal visit. I loved it because my father was a diplomat and my brother was a diplomat. They were both ambassadors. I never got to be an ambassador, but at least I got to visit an ambassador and talk to him about the great things of democracy and progress in Turkey. Okay, so more questions and more answers?
Yeah, I think another thing that I wanted to ask you about was kind of the division between the board and the staff. I was talking to Joel Canaro the other day. And I think even Michael Scammell had some things to say about this.
Oh, you've interviewed both of them?
Yeah.
Boy, what did they tell you? I should know what stories they've been putting out there. Both of those guys.
Their memories are not so good.
Oh, I bet.
No,
I bet they're better than mine.
You're actually they both they didn't. Well, they both had vague memories of their time during President as Penn, and I think because they both had done so much as members beforehand, a lot of the years had kind of run together. And so,
but they're more recent than I am and younger.
I don't know if there was something else at work here. Well, I think there's been a professionalization of Penn American Center from the earlier days, and there's still,
I think that's true.
Even when I came on in the early 2000s, there was people would call up and they would want to know about the Penn Club and the salons and the author evenings and the different things that used to be a part of Penn, and they still are a part of Penn, but not such a. They're much not what Penn is known for now, and it seems like in the 50s and 60s, I was talking to Tom Fleming, and he said that, boy, in the 60s, they were really known as a cocktail society, and they didn't take on any of the serious issues, and writers like Allen Ginsberg and Lowell and Norman Mailer wouldn't have anything to do with Penn in the 60s because they were out on the front lines, really raising issues, and Penn was more content to be on the sidelines and talking about issues that established writers were concerned about. That really changed in the 70s.
Sure did.
Both Ginsberg and Mailer were members in the 70s. Mailer went on to be president, 84 to
86, I think, anyway, well, 85 to 87, somewhere in there.
And there many people have been very, very involved, but the Penn didn't really have a professional staff.
Well, the clubbiness, let me, on the same topic, the clubbiness had died by the time I joined, and some people complained about that. There were still people around, the old-timers, who really thought that we'd lost the capacity for writers to get together and smooth with each other and talk and exchange stuff. It hadn't totally died, but it certainly was not the intention any longer of that to be a club, and we didn't like it being called a club, really. We were more serious, and we thought there were too many issues of real importance rather than cocktail exchange. But we went on, having membership meetings and all that sort of thing, and tried to keep some of that up. It just was very difficult, and particularly with a board of 90 people, that's no club in any sense. And by the time that was all corrected, it was a different attitude, different perspective that people had about what Penn ought to be doing.
And did you, as a member, I'm not sure when you joined Penn, but did you sense that change taking place? Were there any moments when you realized that the organization was going in a different direction? It seems like maybe the '86 Congress was one of those moments.
Well, I was in it well before that, and I think, as I say, I joined very seriously trying to defend translation as my primary interest initially. But also, when I saw what Writers in Prison was doing and all of that, I got involved in that very actively from the very start. And I don't think I would have been interested simply in the club, although that, also I was living in Princeton, New Jersey. I didn't go into New York that often. I wasn't part of the... But I started going in more often. And we had... part of that was okay. I was the head of the membership committee for a while. And I got to go into parties of a smaller kind. But we also had that lovely setup on... I can't even remember the address exactly. That was off 11th Street.
I remember I heard stories that Kurt Vonnegut would have a fight with his wife and end up sleeping in the office.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Rumors from rumors.
When was that? Gee whiz. He had a fight on the floor of one of my meetings when he got angry because he thought people were squabbling too much, and he said, "Children, if you don't stop squabbling, I'm going to walk out of the room." And some people said, "Well, go ahead. Or if you want to go ahead, walk out of the room. Who gives a damn?" This kind of thing. A bit of that going on. But yeah, he was a bit volatile. But anyway, the clubbiness side of it, there's still something of that, and you can't do everything. You've got to have a focus on something if you're really going to do something concrete. And the focus did shift, and thank goodness that it shifted. I mean, otherwise, I don't think Penn would have survived. For one thing, people just didn't have the time to only have a cocktail organization or anything of substance. It
seems like there were issues. I know with Charter, what was it, 78 in Czechoslovakia when Penn, I think, came to. There were many letter-writing campaigns and many international and diplomatic moves to defend writers in major uprisings, not just who were
that's right.
standing up for bigger issues that had more at stake than the individual censorship of one writer.
That's also correct. It has broadened that, and under Anthony Appiah, a wonderful man, even if he is a Princetonian now, they've gone on doing that sort of thing. I mean, they're ready. They're ready to jump in when necessary on something that's international, and I'm very pleased by that.
Now, with the administration, was there a mixing between the administration, the board members, the president, the officers, and the staff in the 90s? Was there that much of a? And I know I'll talk to Karen Kennerly about this, but one of the things that we're interested in is the different roles that board members and officers played, as opposed to staff, and if there was crossing over between the two.
Well, there certainly was under Karen Kennerly. I mean, she was a dear friend of mine, and has remained so over the years. But she was one reason that I decided I wanted to take it seriously too, because there was always a chance of doing something important while she was working with other members of the board too. I mean, she had, I think, a good relationship with most of them, and the staff was under her was smaller. I can't remember now, but certainly during my presidency, I was very friendly with all the staff. I think Siobhan was head of Writers in Prison originally, and Moscow. Let me think. Who was head of in charge of? Yeah, well, there were. I'm trying to think of do you have any recollection of?
I actually started piecing together some of the notes. Moskowitz sounds very familiar.
Well, yeah, but
either membership.
Membership.
Or awards.
No. She was the chief fundraiser. No, she was the freedom. She was the major fundraiser. That was her job. God, what? See what happens to memory?
Well,
that's where you have to. But anyway, she was also a dear friend of mine. But I haven't seen her in so long now. I have kept up some with Karen Kennerly, but it's different.
Well, maybe one of the things, maybe more important is maybe the funding of Penn. Maybe there was. You mentioned earlier that there was the Penn Foundation. I know I'll follow up with Karen on this. But it seems there was always this divide between wanting to maintain a Penn American Center as a writers' organization. It was really about run by and for writers, and that a lot of the there were opportunities to open it up to larger donors who would be able to help facilitate some of the programming, but they were considered as outsiders, and they weren't really necessarily welcome. Seems like there are several instances where that has come up.
That was a major issue, yes, exactly. And I was talking about the time with Larry McMurtry.
Right.
And his effort, which I think was substantial, to build out the foundation so the foundation became something that was more directly involved. And I think Karen Kennelly has pointed out that at one point she was able to organize the idea of the Penn American Center Executive Committee meeting with the Executive Committee of the Foundation as one solution for including those people who were not actually members in the actual decision process and in the promotion of what Penn was interested in and discussion of that kind of thing. And that got, I don't know how far that got. You have to check with her about what the actual situation of that was, and how, why. I think it went on to some degree, and then something else happened that shifted the nature of the foundation. Those are the details that happened later and that I wasn't involved in. So, but she can give you details on that. Yeah.
Well, the early '90s were kind of pivotal. The Soviet Union opened up. Were there any issues? Were there any human rights issues that you remember from your time that took center stage? Any actions? Any writers and
during 91 to 93, I don't remember anything specific of that kind. Can we have a pause a minute?
Yeah, of course.
Can you just turn that off a minute? Yeah. You just went right over there to where that was. I was going to say, let's see where there's a plug in this room.
Worked out
Amazing,
perfectly.
amazing.
I'm sorry for the interruption.
That's all right. We've gotten a little messy, but you're going to clean up what I said earlier. Anyway, I'm not sure. Yeah, I remember now hearing that the Friends of Penn had somehow died, and I was sorry about that because that took a lot of energy, and it was something that seemed to me to be so obvious. But also the idea of getting somehow, I mean, the Authors Guild does have a way of, if you are a well-heeled writer, you pay additional membership.
Right.
I'd try that with Penn, and I think we would have been shot down. People would have got up and screamed and hollered and said, but I mean, that's one way, some way to get help from those writers who have a tremendous amount of income. The ones who don't, okay, they pay their dues, and if they can add something to it, that's fine, and they should. But there are also some who are very, very well heeled. I mean, they make a lot of money. A certain percentage of that could go to Penn, and I don't quite know how to get it. I don't know how you get it, because writers are individuals, and they are individualistic, and they you know the whole story. You've been involved in Penn long enough to know what a writer thinks of himself and what egos you have to deal with. And when it comes down to finances, everybody's been poor at one point, and then they get not poor, and it's very hard to remember that you are now in a different category, 1% sometimes. Or even less than that. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be 1%. You can be 5% or 10%. 10% and still give more. And I must say that I was never very good on the fundraising side. I just wasn't imagined enough, I guess. But Karen Kelly and Tamara Moskowitz worked together to build up at least a possibility. And I think Norman Mailer was important initially because he raised the whole question of having a larger budget and of doing grander things because he had the contacts, and he got the contacts. And there are certain standard members of Penn now who still give regularly. They give prizes that have a certain sum involved in all of that. But what we talk about is real fundraising among the very rich writers isn't happening, I don't think.
It's one of those things. It's difficult.
Maybe it is now. I mean, I've got to say I don't really know what's been happening in the last several years. That I'm blind about that.
I think it's always an inevitable disappointment. I think fundraising among writers. And I think it's a combination of many writers. There's such a small percentage who actually do make a good living with their writing, and actually getting them involved. Just going through the archive, I've noticed correspondences from Richard Ford, John Irving, people that are definitely very high up. You know, they've made a very decent living from their writing, and they're no longer involved with pen. And there's something.
It's too bad. They're both of them. John Irving was just here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago. I met him and got to look. I had a good time with him. Richard Ford's an old friend.
And Richard
Way
Ford,
back. He used to teach here too.
And Richard Ford does the festival every now and then. And he's done events, but I don't think they're involved on the level that they used to be. And I think it's just a matter of the involvement, I guess, ebbs and flows.
Yeah, that happens. I mean, you know, having been in charge of creative writing here many years, I had a lot of writers, and there were many who were not members of PEN and should have been.
And it's, I think, a bizarre thing to acknowledge that there's so, you know, I'd say a vast majority of the writers don't know about PEN. It seems like it's become a very tri-state, a very regional membership. At least when you look at our membership roster,
Yeah.
they're mostly in the tri-state area,
Yeah.
or in the northeast.
But that's still a great source.
No, it's
Still
a
still ought to have. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard. I don't know what to say because it isn't solved by hiring a high-powered fundraiser and paying them a lot of money. I mean, that just doesn't work either.
It's community outreach. And it's
That's
really,
right.
It's really, you know, reaching out to the community of writers, but also of university staff, you know, faculty members who are teaching creative writing classes, who are, you know, building up. I think we have a problem with maintaining a younger membership. We have an aging contingency. We're just not attracting the younger writers the way PEN was at one time.
That's too bad. That really is too bad. Yeah.
So I think there's a disconnect, and I think the organization has to make a leap back to attract a younger generation. I think we're making strides in that direction, but I think there need to be some restructuring, lowering the book qualifications for membership from 2 to 1, since it's become so difficult to become public.
It's 2 now.
It's 1 now. It was 2, and now it's 1.
I see. Well, yeah, that ought to help.
So I think there are things are in the works. Unfortunately, I have to catch the train very soon.
Oh, well, listen, we've been talking, how long we've been talking? Over an hour, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I still have, you know, things I wanted to ask you about. If it'd be okay to do a follow-up?
Absolutely.
Okay. I mean, I love.
I feel quite at ease now, so let's do a follow-up.
Okay.
And I'll make sure that I don't forget names again
and I
of vital people.
Well, and now that we're